Absolutely. And how are all of these changes in consumer behavior as it relates to AI going into 2025? What are some of the changes doing to demand and just the industry in general that you're seeing?
Well, I'll address at least the demand pieces of it. When you start slicing the pie differently, and you have a generation or groups of people, humans, who utilize different technology or different tools or different gadgets in order to go about their everyday tasks of doing research, selecting service providers, and so forth. You start shrinking that pie if you have a single strategy for marketing your business. But if I'm only focused on building basic content for the basic services and the basic locations, and I'm focused on a desktop search, then you're going to reach those consumers who are still practicing that old school methodology of opening up their computer or their laptop and typing in their search query. And you're going to miss all of those consumers who do 99% of everything they do on this device, and the other group of consumers who no longer type with their thumbs, they're too lazy for that. They just talk to their device. And that's another group asking a different kind of questions. So I think that's one element that has decreased demand on traditional search and required people to have a multi-channel strategy, a multi content strategy as well. But when you couple that with other economic challenges, I know Brandon, you can go into those, you start to really feel the impacts. And that's why this has been a hard year for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think there's so many things going on, at least in 2024, we've seen across the board for at least the portfolio of our companies that we help to manage their marketing for. It has been economically, at least from an industry perspective, a more difficult year. We're seeing it from manufacturers pulling back in training, events, recruiting efforts, their own internal staffing, equipment sales. Like we're seeing it across the board from so many different individuals we speak. So I think this is definitely a reset year. We had a big ramp up 2020, 2021. Everyone was, riding that wave, reposition their company. Those that invested correctly are now taking advantage and they are owning their competition right now. But this is another kind of great reset, essentially, is we're at the forefront of a really big change in digital marketing. And as Jennifer mentioned, when you only have a certain amount of consumers, how do you get to them all? And you've got to meet them where they consume, and that's in their channel of preference. And if you're stuck focusing on desktop search, that group of customers is shrinking and will continue to shrink. Science and data and stats have shown us everyone's moving to mobile, then everyone's moving to generative, then everyone's moving to voice. It's like you've got to follow that trend a long way. You don't forget what got you there, lean into that still, but make it maybe a smaller piece than it was in the past and focus more on where the trends are taking you so you can stay relevant in all channels.
Yeah,
And
I agree. Doesn't help to be an election year and horrible interest rates and people being more conservative. I mean, you start adding all these things up and being a little behind already as an industry, it, they feel it.
yeah. And with all of that, how I guess transitioning here, and Brandon, if you want to touch on this now or maybe to later on in our webinar here, what would you say like folks can do as their approach to the budget coming into 2025? Like, is there a certain amount or percentage you think people coming out of this year going into next year that should be allocating to digital marketing, or what's that approach look like, or that you think people should be taking into account?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I think let's jump to the next slide forward. I think this paints a really good picture. So we did a little bit of an analysis here locally, internally. And what this does is I got a chart here in the middle that gives you three scenarios essentially. Okay, so scenario one is the first three bars. That's you're in a growing economy. This is you've got the wind behind your backs pushing you forward. The economy itself, the market's up 10%. A lot of consumers are out looking for new installs, replacements, etc. Great. If you're spending, let's say 5% of your gross revenue, what we saw historically was around 34% total business growth. Okay, so this is if you take 5% of your gross revenue and you dedicate it towards marketing as a whole, as an aggregate, and you had the economy pushing you forward, you're at 34% and change. The second scenario, this is a contracting economy, right? This is you're working against the tides. You're stuck in sand here. If the economy is moving back 20%, your industry is pulling back 20%, equipment sales are down, even if you were to double your budget, you're still not going to hit where you were any year with all the wind pushing you forward. It's too much to move at one time as a single sole company. And then the last scenario is an economy that's relatively flat, 1%, probably not even keeping up with inflation, but really just at least coasting. Looking at the same spend, that marketing spend, you're still going to get some growth, but again, you're working uphill. You want to have that economy push you. So we did an analysis. This was very helpful to see internally, but what this illustrates to us is that when the economy is pulling back, it is definitely not the time to take your foot off the gas. It's the time to double down on your operational efforts. You harness every lead that comes into your platform. You double down on value add. You make sure that the consumer feels that you are the company they should be spending their money on right now. And you are the company that is going to add value and trust to what they're willing to spend. The dollar doesn't go as far, right? We know in an inflationary market, people aren't just going to willy-nilly spend their money. They're going to be more particular. They're going to want to do more research. We're seeing a contraction in paid ads being a little bit less fruitful, a little bit less demand on paid ads, leaning more into the trust and credibility, which is built through search and through legitimate authority and domain authority. So we're seeing those channels be more advantageous in a contracting or pulling back market. We have a feeling in 2025 with what we're seeing with the election and the soft, kind of the soft landing, I think we're going to be kind of the same, a flat, potentially a slight contraction year. You want to make sure that you're positioned well, you're aware of how your budget is being spent, and you're really turning inwards and saying, if I'm only going to get X amount of leads this year, how do I capitalize on every single one of them? We see through our data research that there's a lot of leads coming in that are not taken advantage of. We are not properly managing our leads, and a lot of value is lost there. So we're seeing a lot of companies really repositioning and looking at tools to improve their operations so that what is being provided to them, they can take full advantage of.
I have a question. So when you are talking specifically about seasonal businesses, HVAC, plumbing, and so forth, I think there is a decent amount of energy and effort put on what should I do in advance of a slow season, shoulder season. But an election year is the same as any shoulder season. It just happens every 4 years. So how early should everyone have been preparing for an election year, and what typically is associated with an election year from a demand, economy, consumer spending, trust, all of those things? Is this a topic we should even be having a conversation on right now, or should we have been talking about this last year as a part of a normal SOP for preparation and expansion prior to what we know will be a contracting year?
Yes, I think it's a great question. So 100% election years mean a lot for the economy as a whole, not just this industry. You see it in the equity markets, you see it in the overall markets. Like election years create uncertainty. Uncertainty creates volatility and or emotional pullback on where people spend their money, where they invest their money, how they hold on to their investments. Uncertainty always drives volatility. That's just the name of the game. Typically what we know and what we see is the amount of time that it takes to affect change is at least 6 months back, right? If you weren't thinking about this 6 months ago, you've missed the boat. And we're discussing it here because you shouldn't stop talking about it. And we've, at least internally on our side, been doing a lot of pre-planning for the election. So I think it's a good topic to keep top of mind. These are things that are going to come up every time you're speaking with a potential customer. The topic is potentially on the line. They're going to want to know things internally. Your staff going to want to know what's happening in the world. So I think it's a good topic to bring up. I think for sure any sort of major political event like this, or any major event, seasonality included, is really a 6-month out prep plan, make adjustments. And we are in this industry and have been for so long that the way we cyclically manage our business already really kind of covers us in most of these instances. We've built in seasonality into how we market. We've built in all of these scenarios. So I think for us, it's good. If you're just now starting to look at this, you've got a little bit of catch up, but you can still position your company in a rather good spot for this.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Agree.
Yeah. And going into